April 18, 2021. Most football fans were asleep when it happened. Late on a Sunday night, a statement appeared online. Then another. Then another. Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, Tottenham, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus. One after another, some of the biggest clubs in football announced they were leaving behind the system that had defined European football for generations. A new competition was coming: the European Super League. Within minutes, phones started buzzing across Europe. Fans opened social media and couldn't believe what they were reading. Television networks interrupted coverage. Former players reacted in real time. Journalists scrambled for answers. And while outrage spread across the football world, another battle was already beginning behind closed doors. UEFA declared war. Club executives defended their decision. Governments threatened action. Then FIFA stepped forward. Publicly, football's governing body positioned itself as a defender of the game, standing against a project many fans believed would destroy everything football represented. But not everyone was convinced. Because as FIFA condemned the Super League, critics started asking an uncomfortable question. Why was the organization suddenly acting as football's protector when it had spent years pursuing controversial expansion plans of its own? What followed was one of the most dramatic 48-hour periods in football history. A story of secret meetings, public outrage, collapsing alliances, and a rebellion that seemed unstoppable, until it suddenly wasn't. The first signs appeared just before midnight. For months, rumors had circulated around Europe. Secret meetings, private negotiations, powerful club owners discussing a future outside UEFA's control. Most fans dismissed the stories. Then the announcement arrived. On April 18th, 12 clubs released coordinated statements confirming the creation of the European Super League. The list was staggering: Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, Tottenham, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Juventus, Inter Milan, AC Milan. Together, they represented hundreds of trophies, billions in revenue, and millions of supporters around the world. The proposal was simple. The founding clubs would have guaranteed places in the competition every season. No qualification battles. No risk of missing out. No dependence on domestic performance. For the clubs behind the project, it was a financial revolution. For many fans, it felt like a betrayal. By sunrise, football was in chaos. Television studios abandoned planned programming. Radio phone lines exploded. Former players openly attacked the proposal. Across social media, supporters demanded answers. How had this happened? Who had approved it? And why had so many clubs joined at once? Then UEFA responded. Its statement was immediate and aggressive. The governing body promised to stop the project. Players could face bans. Clubs could be excluded from competitions. The battle lines were now drawn. But UEFA wasn't the only organization reacting. As headlines spread across the world, FIFA released its own statement opposing the Super League. The message sounded clear. FIFA stood with traditional football. FIFA stood against the breakaway clubs. At least, that's what it wanted people to believe. Because while fans focused on the rebellion itself, questions were beginning to emerge about FIFA's own plans for the future of the game. And those questions were about to put Gianni Infantino directly in the spotlight. 3 days later, the pressure reached its peak. On April 21st, football's most powerful figures gathered at UEFA's Congress in Montreux, Switzerland. The Super League was still alive, technically, but cracks were already beginning to appear. Outside meeting rooms, journalists chased officials through hallways. Television crews waited for reactions. Every microphone was pointed toward one man: Gianni Infantino. As FIFA president stepped onto the stage, the football world was watching. His message was blunt. Clubs involved in the Super League, he said, must live with the consequences of their choices. The speech generated headlines immediately. Many fans applauded it. For a moment, FIFA appeared to be standing shoulder to shoulder with supporters who wanted the project destroyed. But not everyone was convinced by the performance. Because critics remembered something important. Long before the Super League appeared, FIFA had been pursuing ambitious plans of its own. One proposal involved dramatically expanding the Club World Cup. More teams, more matches, more broadcasting revenue, more global reach. The idea had already created tensions with UEFA and several domestic leagues. Now those old arguments were suddenly returning. Football journalists began highlighting the similarities. The Super League wanted more control over elite club football. FIFA wanted a larger role in elite club football. The methods were different. The goals looked surprisingly familiar. Questions started appearing in newspaper columns and television debates. Was FIFA defending football? Or was it defending its position inside football? Meanwhile, events were moving faster than anyone expected. Inside England, club executives were facing a different problem. The backlash wasn't slowing down. It was growing. Supporters were organizing protests. Former players were speaking out. Even politicians were getting involved. The people who had launched the Super League believed they could survive criticism. What they didn't expect was the scale of the resistance that was about to hit them. And nowhere would that resistance be more visible than outside Stamford Bridge. On the evening of April 20th, thousands of Chelsea supporters flooded the streets around Stamford Bridge. Blue smoke filled the air. Flags waved above the crowd. Police officers formed lines outside the stadium. What should have been an ordinary match night had turned into one of the biggest fan protests English football had seen in years. As Chelsea prepared to face Brighton, supporters blocked roads leading to the stadium. Chants echoed through West London. Some fans climbed barriers. Others held signs accusing club owners of selling the sport's soul. Television cameras captured every moment. Then came an image that quickly spread across the world. Former Chelsea goalkeeper Petr Cech, now working as a club executive, stepped into the crowd. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to calm people down. Supporters surrounded him. Some pleaded with him. Others shouted their frustrations directly at the club. The emotion was impossible to miss. Anger, confusion, disbelief. Many fans felt their club had joined a competition that nobody had asked for and nobody wanted. And Chelsea wasn't alone. Across England, pressure was building on every Super League club. Liverpool players released statements. Manchester United supporters demanded answers. Former football legends appeared on television condemning the project. The rebellion against the Super League was no longer coming from governing bodies. It was coming from the people in the stands. Then, behind closed doors, something changed. Club executives who had appeared confident just 48 hours earlier were suddenly holding emergency discussions. The protests were damaging. Sponsors were nervous. Politicians were threatening intervention. And some owners were beginning to realize they had badly underestimated the reaction. Late that night, reports started emerging that one club was preparing to pull out. If that happened, the entire project could unravel. Within hours, the first domino would fall. And once it did, the collapse would be impossible to stop. Just after midnight, the first crack became impossible to ignore. Manchester City were preparing to leave. Only 2 days earlier, the club had stood alongside 11 others as a founding member of the European Super League. Now, reports from England suggested they were already looking for a way out. The reaction was immediate. Journalists rushed to confirm the story. Supporters celebrated online. Executives at other clubs watched nervously. Then it became official. Manchester City withdrew. The moment the announcement appeared, the entire project began to shake. Chelsea followed. Soon after, Arsenal released a statement. Liverpool apologized to supporters. Manchester United backed away. Tottenham left. One by one, the English clubs abandoned the competition they had helped create. The scenes outside stadiums changed overnight. Fans who had spent 2 days protesting were suddenly celebrating. Banners were raised. Songs echoed through the streets. Supporters who felt powerless only hours earlier believed they had forced some of football's richest owners into retreat. But while clubs were leaving, one figure refused to surrender. Florentino Perez. The Real Madrid president had become the public face of the Super League. Instead of disappearing, he went on Spanish television to defend the project. Calm and defiant, Perez insisted the competition was necessary. He argued that football faced serious financial problems. He claimed younger audiences were losing interest, and he warned that the sport needed dramatic change. His comments created an unexpected problem, because while many fans rejected the Super League, some of the issues Perez raised were real. Revenues had been hit hard. Debt was rising at several major clubs. The financial pressures that inspired the project had not disappeared. The competition itself was collapsing, but the reasons behind it remained. Within 48 hours, what had been announced as football's future was effectively dead. Yet as celebrations continued across Europe, a bigger question was starting to emerge. If the Super League had failed so spectacularly, why were so many powerful people convinced that football still needed major change? And why did some of those ideas sound surprisingly familiar to plans already being discussed inside FIFA? A few days after the collapse, the headlines began to fade. The protests ended. The emergency statements stopped. The Super League's website went quiet. To most fans, the story was over. Football had won. Or at least that was how it appeared. But beneath the celebrations, the arguments that created the Super League never disappeared. Real Madrid president Florentino Perez continued defending the project. Barcelona president Joan Laporta refused to completely abandon the idea. Both men insisted that football's economic model was under pressure and that major reforms would eventually become unavoidable. Meanwhile, FIFA continued pushing forward with plans of its own. The organization's expanded Club World Cup remained on the agenda. A tournament featuring more teams, more matches, more commercial opportunities. For critics, the contrast was difficult to ignore. When clubs attempted to create a new competition, football's governing bodies condemned the idea immediately. Yet many of those same governing bodies were pursuing larger tournaments and greater control over the game's future. The methods were different. The objectives often sounded similar. That contradiction became one of the lasting legacies of the Super League crisis. The rebellion had failed. The clubs had backed down. But the deeper debate remained unresolved. How should football grow? Who should control its biggest competitions? And where should the money go? Years later, those questions still have no clear answer. The Super League lasted less than 48 hours. Yet it exposed tensions that continue to shape football today. For many supporters, the most memorable image wasn't a boardroom meeting or a press conference. It was thousands of fans standing outside stadiums, proving that even in a sport driven by billions of dollars, public pressure could still change the course of events. For now, the Super League is gone, but the battle over football's future is far from finished. The Super League was supposed to change football forever. Instead, it collapsed in less than 48 hours. But years later, the questions it raised are still being debated across the sport. Did fans save football from a dangerous idea? Or did they stop a project that exposed problems nobody has solved since? And when FIFA and the biggest clubs clash over the future of the game, who do you trust more? Let us know what you think in the comments. And subscribe if you want football documentaries that follow the story behind the headlines.